The following is a conversation with Dr. Sherry Holmes, Director of Student Technology Services. In this conversation, Dr. Holmes shares with us her passion for bridging the digital divide, especially amongst underrepresented communities. In our conversation, Dr. Holmes talks to us about her passion for cooking, how academia has adapted to COVID, and lastly, the resources, the time, the people necessary to succeed at an elite university. And all that being said, I'd love to present to you Dr. Sherry Holmes.
I was thinking about it prior to our call, like who like my favorite chefs are in my life. You're like definitely in my top five. I don't think I have a ranking, but like my mom's up there for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I also not like I mean this genuinely from the bottom of my stomach.
I appreciate hearing that. I really do.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
absolutely. No, thank you for like all of the Thanksgiving meals. They're like, here, you just need a little bit of warmth in your belly. That's not like a cold sandwich every week.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, like more broadly speaking, what's your relationship to food, and like what about it like would you want more people to know about? Like you have to understand this about food.
Yeah. I think one thing that people need to understand is the intimacy of food. You know, when you're making it for someone or just even consuming, you're literally putting something into your body, you know?
Yeah.
So it's important to know what you're putting in when you're actually preparing it. You have to cook with love because you want people to feel and sense that love. You can actually taste. I've made a joke like I don't want that cup of hate. You know, it's a cup of soup from somewhere like everybody behind the counter. They're being really mean, and I swear my meal exchange is different in that kind of place as opposed to I could be, you know, feeding the homeless seriously at a church, and if it's given and prepared with love, you can sense that and feel it, and you know, it's enjoyed more. So it's one of the most intimate relationships we have that we don't pay attention to. Yeah, food, the creation, the preparation, the thought, the planning, the consumption, all of that. It's very qualitative to your life, I think.
Yeah, could I ask you a little bit more about the planning? Because I think one of the big things I've realized being back home. So now my mom, she'll cook for the whole family. And I think one of the things I really want to take from her, like her long term is the planning component of things. Because for example, if I was to give my mom like a random set of like 80 ingredients, I guess if I were to put my mom in like one of those like cooking shows, I'm pretty confident that she would have something either that she's done before and is really tasty, or she'll just like combine a few things and say, oh, you know, I can do this dish this way, and maybe I've never done it before, but at least I have a plan. So what goes in your planning of food?
You know, here's the thing. COVID kind of changed the game, and I'm just going to be honest with that. When there was a big period of you couldn't go to grocery stores, or you were pulsed in, you had to organize that. You know, you could only go if you were 65 years old and up from 6 a.m. to 7. That impacted how I prepare meals. And also the fact that I had taken in a bunch of people into my home, I had to cook large batches of food, right? So I started this relationship that I had never had before with Instacart, and shipped items that I could purchase, go in my car, pull my car up. They come and load all the groceries and everything else that I have, everything I wanted. But the disconnect there for me was kind of handing off that potential of changing the way my food might taste, because when I say it's intimate, like, you know, you pick up the tomato, you squeeze the tomato, you take a look at that melon, you tap. But for me to put my trust into a commoner, I'll say, you know, just some, you know, gin pop person, it took a lot for me to do that. But it was like I had to. I didn't have a choice there. You know, if I wanted to get food in here in the next 24, 48 hours during COVID, that's what I had to go with, as opposed to, you know, waiting 4 days for my number to come up. I mean, it was really quite odd, but it did change pretty much the landscape of how I shop now. I don't go into grocery stores anymore now. I don't. I'm not. I've never been one of those box delivery type of people, like, you know, fresh box. Or are you there?
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
listening. Yep.
I'm sorry. I thought I lost you. I'm sorry. You know, Blue Apron, things of that nature.
Yep.
Because I do like the options. Like, to your mom's point, you bring me into a kitchen, I got the ingredients. It's still up to me of what I want to make and what I want to create, or where, you know, my sweet spot is. But when it comes to those boxes, it's already kind of pre-planned, and it's got to look like this picture. And, you know,
Yep.
I think it's helpful for folks that don't cook organically. You know, they just either there are folks like you that are waiting for a plate, or, you know, it kind of keeps them, you know, in line with not going out to have to get these things. It's all in a box. So I kind of had this weird hybrid of that relationship of having food delivered, but only to my car. But I still have the options of doing whatever I want with those types of ingredients, as opposed to, you know, again, a box, like a fresh box comes in, you're supposed to make things exactly that way. But I can see how something like that would be helpful for people that, you know, either have large families, or they're interested in kind of like a Russian roulette of what they're going to get. You know, they don't want to kind of get stuck in the same, you know, it's tiki taco night on Tuesdays for us, you know. That's what we do, but everybody doesn't want to feel that way. They want to open up a box, and there's all kinds of options there that they would not normally put together themselves. So in terms of planning, COVID changed some things there. It really, truly did, with how I shop, how I meal plan now. I used to be a lot more in tune with what we were going to eat, like on a weekly basis, and now I'm a little bit more, you know, gnarly with it, because I'll say I want all these things in here, and then I just kind of like take it from there and put together what I want. You know, that's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, I think one more question on like the food section. If and I guess I'm thinking of like recipes. So one of the things that we want to do with DemiTool, right, is to be able to like store certain sets of information and then you share it with whomever. And for me personally, one of the things I really want to take away from my mom's cooking is her Christmas tamales. So this past Christmas, what I was happy to do was record the different steps. So in this case, it's you start with the masa, you have your chicken, there's the sauce making process, you cut your veggies, there's the wrapping component, there's the boiling component, and after a few hours, it's time to eat. And so, like, that's one of those things where like I from a young age, like if every Christmas, maybe like a couple of exceptions, like we know what we're eating from like the 20th of December to almost the end of the year. Is there one specific recipe that you would want to pass down to your kids?
Yes, it is. And it's funny because my son just got off the school bus and walked home, and I feel terrible because I promised him I would make him spaghetti tonight. It is spaghetti. It's it's an old school sauce I make. It takes like 8 hours to make. It's something that I would even get set up, even crock pot style, you know, throughout the day while I'm at work, come home, take it out, and then put it on the stove top. But yeah, it would be my sauce, because everything's natural. Everything is, there's nothing out of a can or a jar. And my family loves it. Students love it. I brought in a whole bunch of it. I only tend to make it like 4 times a year, but I've been on a roll lately with the demand/request. So I've made it a little bit more frequently than normal. But yeah, my pasta, old school Italian Bostonian pasta.
Yeah,
that's what that
Boston,
is. Yeah,
that makes sense. Yep.
And it's funny because like I think about something, you know, in mindset of DemiTool, the way I envision what you guys are doing, it's kind of like a cookbook, you know, for your life, so to speak, right? That's how I'm envisioning this. So it's nice to be able to have like a step-by-step with trusted outcomes, you know, and I think that's what everybody's looking towards and needing right now. And again, I hate to bring up the C19 event, but it's a game changer, man. This COVID stuff's no joke, and it has changed and impacted things greatly. And I even say that in the academic level, we had a professor that she's world renowned. You know, she still had this MBA class that she was doing at WashU, and she was stuck because let me back up. When we first got hit with COVID in March, by June, I was having really significant conversations with administration where I was saying things like, you know, Harvard is not Harvard if it's online, period. Yeah. Right. So it makes everybody, all the normal things that people had for their accolades, you had to change the game. If you're talking about facilities, you know, buildings, you know, resources of some of the top tier professors in the world and all, if you don't have that kind of engagement, just, you know, socially and physically, well, what's left? You got empty buildings, you know, and professors that are in Crete not wanting to learn Canvas. So, you know, how do you differentiate, you know, how do you make things relevant to today? And so we talked to this professor, I will leave her name out of this, but she's actually packaging what we put together for her. And she was like, yeah, it's a cookbook approach, Sherry. That's exactly what we're looking for. Regardless of what I'm teaching, the outcome has to be the same. There has to be something that is like produced. And so I said, okay, even though we're talking about a business class, at the end of the day, say you have an entrepreneur and they have a logo or something, let's teach them the elements of 3D printing so that they can showcase that logo, or maybe build out a building, you know, not to scale, of course, but something to kind of visualize what they're trying to do. Or they have these kind of like hybrid parks that some business was talking about doing. And then another one was a website to highlight what the business does, but like really interactive, not flat. You know, I'm not talking DOS, I'm talking like, you know, really interactive. And I think the other one was like a 30-second ad, more or less, on whatever business they were pushing, or you know, commercial, you know. So she was able to take that 3-prong approach and wrap it up and come up with like well, we're also working on a simulator for her right now. Some students are that work for me, where they're using those 3 qualities to see what kind of impact it has on their returns. It's pretty wild. But my point is I'm coming back to your cookbook, you know, philosophy. You know, it didn't matter that these folks weren't in IT, and you know how this goes. Whenever you say the words technology, people's eyes glaze over like, ugh. And it's like, no, it's just the way the work gets done. That's all it is. It doesn't have to be plug and play. It could be anything. Technology is anything. But, you know, at the end of the day, you got to produce something. So she took what we had, and like, she's really marketing this thing it's getting pretty large. It's pretty cool. But I'm just bringing up the cookbook philosophy because that's what she was going for. And those 3 approaches kind of, you know, it's a cookbook now. This is how you do this, no matter what, where you're at, doesn't matter. You do this, that, and this is the result. You do this, that, and this is the result. So just want to bring that up.
Yeah, and then to add to that, I think one of the big takeaways personally is that the idea with a cookbook is, I have some experience, here are the materials you need, here are the steps, and then, as you mentioned, there's a conclusion, there's a product at the end of it. Yep. I like using
product consistent. Yeah.
Oh, and the consistency of it, true. I think what I really appreciate for DemiTool from a personal standpoint, and like something that I want just general people to have, is as like humans, we've done many things that we are like stored. And so like books was a long time ago, we were thinking about, oh, like books are the things that like hold a lot of information. And as you mentioned, the steps to it, you read it, you follow the steps, you get your end product. And so to be able to do that with different parts of life, because ideally for me, like one of the things I want to do is I've saved up a lot of the music and a lot of the TV I grew up watching and listening to. And so to be able to give like a USB or a hard drive to my children, say, hey, I really want y'all to like enjoy The Simpsons, because a lot of my humor, which I want to pass down, is from this media. At the same time, like I spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to learn chemistry, chemical engineering, engineering management. And so to be able to store that information in a way that like I can give it to whomever, because it's mine, and it's like the first work has been done. If they want to replicate it, then let me do my best to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah. It's like a hard drive for your life, more or less. Like, here you go.
Yep, exactly. And
here you go.
Some of this will be useful, some of this won't, and like you take as much as you can.
I agree.
I now want to ask you about your goals, and I think I want to ask like two time frames of it, because I appreciate you talking about like technology in the sense that it is just how the work gets done. I remember you
Yeah.
mentioning that months ago, and I appreciate the simplicity of the answer, because one of our things is we have to make whatever we produce as simple, as cheap,
That's
as
right.
accessible as possible, so that humans all over the world can use it. And so
Yeah.
I want to ask you what your goals were prior to your PhD and then afterwards,
Uh-huh.
and also if you could take us a little bit of context for your PhD.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, so just as a background, I came to St. Louis and my original arena was social work. So for all intents and purposes, I have no reason in the world to be an IT director at a world-class institution. I'm just going to put that out there. I had no background in technology, but I had either I was goofy enough or brave enough. I don't know which one it is yet to just kind of jump in and learn it because I know I'm teachable, right? But aside from that, I'm not the only one that is. And so one of my biggest passions throughout all of this process for the last 20 years and beyond is to remove some of those mental barriers people have from all walks of life, right? When it comes to technology, because it's frustrating when people self-select themselves out of certain arenas just because they think there's all these things that are entailed, and they're not. I mean, I'm not trying to make programming overly simplistic by any means, but I can tell you, I had a problem last week with an app that we developed 5 years ago for another professor, and all of my students were on fall break. So I crack open the back end to take a look, and I'm just hearing, you know, I mean, it's just Greek, man. You know what I mean? I don't know, right? And I'm nervous even opening the thing. But I promise you, on the side of the, who we're using, Curu, I think we were using. But in any case, it was literally a step by step how to update the back end, literally. Now,
Yeah.
I was bold and brave enough to give it a shot. The only thing that creeped me out is I didn't know how to create a test site. That I didn't know. So when I knew I needed to do that much in order to even goof around with this thing, because if I break it even more or whatever, we need to be able to, you know, time machine back and undo what Sherry thought she could do, you know. But my point is, just making sure that people don't automatically select themselves out of options that there really isn't an option at this point. These aren't the days where, you know, you're going to be able to just use lined paper and a number 2 pencil. It just isn't, right? It just really, truly isn't. And
Yeah.
so
I see.
if we have to embrace this technology by understanding that everything is technology. I've mentioned to you before, I quilt. I make quilts of stories, and I got some for my mom this weekend. And so that's on my list of things to help put together. But believe me, I'm not plug and playing any of that. But that is still technology. Basket weaving is technology. It is the technical mechanics, the components of which you get the work done. So when people can think of it like that, I mean, even when I was pursuing my doctorate, I was working with students that had no background in IT, number one. Number two, they were socially underrepresented populations because at the grand university I worked at, we opened up the floodgates to let students in that weren't normally the traditional students at that university. And I don't know if you've named this school or not, but I'm just going to keep saying that university, this university, if that's okay. But that said, once that opened and folks were identified with the talent and the academic rigor historically to be able to come into the school, there wasn't any programming put into place for these kids. And so they automatically, just out of, you know, fish out of water stuff, they would hole up in their rooms, throw on 15, 20 pounds, eat the same food out of the cafeteria, you know, chicken tenders and fries, because that's what they know. They don't know a $12 steak. They don't know foie gras, right? They don't know these things. So I was identifying that and thought that the one thing I could kind of pull them out to bring them into their current environment, I mean, it's their environment, right?
Yeah.
People often say you're admitted, but you're not accepted, right? So these students that were admitted into this university, they weren't necessarily accepted. So they did what they were supposed to do, which was like back off and hide away. So I would come out to them and show them the tools that they had that were available. They had access to 3D printing. They had access to high-end Mac machines. These were all things that were just built into their environment. Some people work better shadowing others or with peers. Others, if you kind of let them check a machine out with like a library card system with their ID, they'll go into their room and kind of piddle around with it and figure out some stuff and come back with, intelligent questions that they actually have, as opposed to putting a sticker on them like, this is the internet. This is how letting them kind of like figure out where they want help and prompting them to even ask for help. So in terms of like my passion, philosophy, I didn't do this degree to go to cocktail parties and like, hoop it up with folks. I did it because I literally saw a problem that needed to be addressed, because we were bringing in students, but we weren't retaining them. We weren't interested in the retention numbers. We're now at 14% diversity. We're now at 19% diversity, whatever that is, right? But I got another quote I love, which is diversity counts people, inclusion means people count. And so in order to go out and meet these people truly where they are, you have to kind of embrace the idea that I'm actually at the lost, right? I'm kind of meet you where you are, which is somewhere completely different than where I am. And I need you to get me to where you are, as opposed to me bringing you where I'm at. Does that make sense?
It does. Could you say that statement one more time? I just really liked it.
Which? Oh, yeah. I wrote this before. If diversity counts people, inclusion means people count. So you're not counting numbers and heads and colors and, gender, tools and parts, man. You're counting, you're making something welcoming enough for anybody to come in and with their types of talents or resources and even struggles. I mean, there's brilliance in that, right? Like things you're going to bring to the table, different types of perspectives. I got to go out and seek that. You can't build it and they will come. Nor can you come there like, I'm going to save everyone. We've all seen that movie. All of them the same, like that. I wasn't interested in recreating that either, but I had to meet these kids where they were. And sometimes, it was not the most comfortable situations. It would be a student conduct situation, or going to the library at 9 o'clock at night and just trying to act like I'm hanging out, I'm 40 years old. I'm like, I don't want to be the library night. Oh, fancy seeing you here. You know what I mean? But you gotta meet people where they are in order to to find out where they are and for them to tell you what they're looking for and what they need. There's no sticker to any of this.
Yeah.
So that's my biggest philosophy. I walk and talk that, and I mean it. We even had a situation where, as I mentioned, during COVID, we had some of these kids staying with us because the whole thing of like, go home. These kids couldn't go home. I mean, they could go home. They could go home, but they didn't have internet. There were kids without windows. You know what I mean? Like, come on, man. So I converted my basement into a classroom. Ticked my husband off because I had wall-to-wall people. But we did the best we could. We weren't eating the fanciest meals, but everybody was eating. And when the press came around, snooping around, trying to get a story out of it, I was livid. Because it wasn't about that,
No.
It wasn't about exploiting anybody's story. It was just so that they could have a seamless experience as much as possible during this pandemic stuff, with things that others would find easy. Well, they go home and they have a room, they have a bed, they have, other kids that they were inviting in did not. They did not. So that's my philosophy, in a nutshell.
If I can ask one question on the
Sure.
So earlier in the conversation, you said these students would be, I guess there's like some level of intimidation or lack of acceptance, and so the students would end up being in their rooms and then consuming unhealthy foods. There's there's a saying in Chinese, and I wish I could remember off the top of my head, but it translates to basically that if things go bad, it can like negatively spiral worse. And so how
Yeah.
if you're in that kind of situation, like how do you slow down the spiral? How do you get out of the spiral? What does it
You
really
know,
take to?
that's a great question. And I say that because, there's also a quote of misery loves company. And that is the truth. If anything is more magnetic than a miserable person, I don't know what is. You know what I mean? I really have no idea. But, folks will start kind of like congregating together under the same type of woes and pains and ills and wills. And just out of a natural method of psychology, it's called a downward spiral perspective. And that's whereas somebody feels like they're at the top of that kind of sphere and everybody else is below them, although they have similar problems, but they seem to be the best out of the lot. So they're like the advisor, and what ends up happening, especially with our high performing kids that typically come from households where they've been tapped as a resource very early on, and I can totally agree with that and identify with that. They start thinking, well, hey, I don't have a problem. What I'm doing is just fine because I'm helping so-and-so and so-and-so. But it's like crabs in a barrel, man. You guys are helping each other stay, at the lowest bottom denominator, right? So, but when you're in that downward spiral, when you're up at the top, it doesn't feel as if you're sinking below. It feels as if, you're that tapped resource of this guru of knowledge, and you're keeping everybody afloat. And the reality is all you're doing is wasting days, time, and time. So how do you help combat that? Exposure. I mean, some call it exposure therapy even, but it's exposure. It's getting people out. I come back to where I work, where I was taking these kids out and showing them, even on one-on-one basis, I'd take them out to lunch on campus, but places they would never go to. The fancy hotel on campus that has a fancy restaurant built in, and it's built in a way to make it feel intimidating, to make it feel as if it's not approachable for certain people. And guess what? The methodology works. But when I bring you in at 11:30, because we got, 11:30 reservations and we're going in, right? It expands and broadens their ideas of like, what is mine? What do I have access to? You have the right to be here, just like anyone else. And let me tell you, your money's just as good as anyone else's. It doesn't matter how it's coming, So it's exposure. I mean, that's what I'm really big on that. I'll even go as far as like myself. I had this fear. I've been doing this thing of facing fears I have, and even small ones. But I had this fear of sitting on my back porch. And I noticed that I would only sit facing, what was in front of me. I would never sit with my back to like my fence and such, And I'm like, Sherry. So I started doing this thing where I would like, slowly but surely expand the time, but I would sit with my back, and then it just kept doing it eventually to the point. Yeah. And eventually, Marlon, guess what? I come out there now. I'm not even thinking. I'll just sit down. You know what I mean? I mean, of course, there's an alley in the back, so like I'm conscious if I hear a noise or car, I'm gonna take a look or whatever. But so situational awareness doesn't go away. I want to be very clear with that. However, I'm not, creating my own boogeyman in my head of fears and not facing it. So I just did it. I exposed myself to that fear, that adrenaline, these conscious and unconscious concerns I had, and eventually, I got to a point now. I just come out there and plop down anywhere. So that's the whole idea of bringing these kids to places that are, I want to be very clear, systemically created to make them or some feel as if they don't belong. It's by design. It's not like, oh, we didn't know. So you got to bring these students to these areas and these arenas to get them accustomed to the fact that this is in fact theirs. This is theirs. Also, you're breaking your bias. You don't want to come in there and act a crazy nut. You don't want to do that either.
It goes both ways.
It goes both ways. But yeah, it's exposure therapy.
I know exactly what you're talking about for the campus, the restaurants, and the only reason I know about that space is because my first year on campus, one of the other people in my group for my business class, he was an MBA, and he invited me to it. And I remember one, being a little lost because there's like two buildings with like the same name. And then
Yes.
once I was going up the stairs, I like had to like step in a little bit and then like look out again. It's like, wait, is this real? And then as I
Yes.
stepped in, my next thought was, wait, how much does everything cost here? And it's not that expensive. I think like a burger was like $12. So like, you know, like a typical burger
Right.
price. But
Right.
just for me personally, it wasn't like fear, but it was not belonging. Just it felt so foreign. But at the same time, my like classmate, and then he had some of his other MBA friends there, felt supernatural. So like I was comfortable in like a couple minutes, but I just remember that like, is this real conversation in my own head
I
as
do
I was
understand.
walking in?
Yeah, that built-in intimidation is done on purpose. But if you peel it back, your work and your efforts are why we get things like an endowment increase. You know, so it is your money. It is yours. It's your work. It's your sweat. It's your time spending in the lab. It's you helping the reputation of that place. You know, it's you graduating. All of those things. It's just as much yours as it is the MBA student that is, you know, groomed to be there, right? Literally. It's the same for an engineer. It's yours as well. So, yeah, I mean, that's it. That's the thing. It's exposure. You know, and even as you said, like you came in eyes wide, like, whoa, wait a minute. And then you think it's just like a $25 burger, like blah, 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 blah. No, everything's fairly reasonable.
Yeah, it was
the presentation,
normal.
oh no, but the presentation makes you feel like, I don't want to break anything, you know, oh my gosh, like this is a lot, but it's yours. It's actually yours.
Yep.
So that's the biggest thing I push with my students. I really do. This is all yours.
The last question I want to ask you is on the people side of things. I think so on DemiTool we have two key needs. So in terms of people, one of them is family and the other one is friends. I wanted to ask, I guess also from like the perspective of a student, because for us all of this is becoming clear, especially from like the perspective of someone helping students. So when you are trying to support these students, like how do their friends and how do their families play a role in them succeeding, or how do you become a support system for them as they're struggling?
Sure. So I'll give you I like examples. So there was a student that was here in 2017, and he was here right when Bitcoin was just starting to pop. And I remember the student who came from next to nothing. I watched him sit and just, you know, he was going into hackathons. We would help sponsor him. He would win them. He was doing really, 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 really well. And I could identify that he was, like I mentioned earlier, that person in his family that had the world on his shoulders. You know, he was somebody probably paying for a light bill when he was 16. So clearly when he was 20, he was still doing it, right? So the more he was making, the more I knew he was going to be a more available resource. I knew this. I didn't come at him and say, you know, don't give nothing to your family now. I didn't say anything like that, but I just kind of watched in the background, and I could see, you know, that he was getting tapped more and more and more by his family. And so I did kind of have a sidebar with him one day, just about, you know, it's that whole idea of how they say on planes, you know, using your oxygen mask on yourself first and then helping somebody next to you. Because if you're not doing your own, you can't, you know, help your neighbor or your child or whatever else. And so I was trying to tell him that, and in that respect, speaking of the word respect, he respected me a great deal, even to the point that I helped him negotiate the money he was getting when he was offered a position. That was fantastic. He did very, very well. But I remember his family coming out for his graduation. And I'll be honest, I mean, I care about you guys like family, you know, and that's because in my own background, a lot of my friends have been like family to me, more so than some family, right? So I know that happens just kind of across the board. But I just was like, I knew what was going on. I knew how people were tapping this kid, and I was really happy that they were coming to see him. But when I saw the mom come, and she worked at like a Family Dollar or a Dollar General, they drove up here from like Arkansas and had to turn around so the mom could go back to the job. You know, she wore jeans, like this was this kid's graduation. He was, you know, highly accoladed and all that kind of stuff. And off the bat, she did not like me. I mean, it was palpable. You could, it wasn't a secret. You know, she had everything but a t-shirt like Sherry died. You know, she did not like me. But you know what? Once she got, instead of me forcing anything on her, I just was still doing what I normally did with her son. I kept telling her, you know, you did really good. You did really good. I meant that, you know. Eventually she broke and she just started crying. And she told me in front of a coworker, you know, I'm going to be honest, I didn't like you because I heard so much about you for 4 years, but I want to thank you for helping finishing up with my son, you know, and that was a big moment. That was huge. So I didn't come in, I want to help embrace the families. I never want to put any kind of division. My focus always is to help this person get through this 4-year window or 6-year window, whatever it is, right? That transition from, you know, basically high school, typically, you know, into the college arena, and then off into the world. And even at 22, you're not grown, you know what I mean? You got numbers behind you. You can go to prison and you can vote and you can go to jail. You know, these are things you can do. You can go to war, but like, you know, we already know the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is not developed now until about 28 years old. So with all that said, I try to make sure that the efforts that we put in, one, it's cultural within the department. It's not just stemming from me. It's resources that are kind of like wrapped around in what we do. It's like we do IT on the side, but the advisory that we do, that's more prominent than the other stuff. Because again, that's technology. It really is. Having these kinds of conversations, helping folks go through these, and you can attest to this, we're talking about extremely rigorous academic environments, right? Where professors don't care. They don't care. You know, like they don't want to hear it. They don't want to, you know, but at the end of the day, these are students and people, and these are kids or young adults, whatever you want to call them, our future. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to call it, but you want to make sure that you're embracing the individual as holistically as possible. And that includes their friends. That includes, and that's a spatial thing, you know, making sure that there's an environment where you can come in, you can study with your friends, or I don't know, play the Switch game or whatever. Come eat. We're having a barbecue. Bring your friends, you know, your family. We send pictures. You know, so it's a very holistic approach. That's what it is. But the coming back to that mom, I will never forget that. I don't care if I'm 99 years old. I will never forget that woman breaking down and like crying and hugging me and just thanking me. And it felt so good because it was scary. I'm not going to play. His mom was, you know, pretty hardcore. You know, I didn't want to get beat up in a dress. I'll tell you that, right? I wasn't in the mood for that. I don't feel. But I mean, I could feel the heat. She did not like me. But eventually it came through that like, this is all we have the best interest for the same person, you know, and there's no competition in that. So yeah, that's the best way I can do it, as opposed to certain places that are part of that university that do kind of make it like a cult where like, this is the only thing. And, you know, rah, we're the best, and they get really big on that, in particular, that first year. And then I pick it up from like the second year on. You know what I mean? That first year experience where they're really big on that first year, you know, white glove service, kid gloves, all that kind of stuff. And then once the game is started with your sophomore year up through your graduate school years, it's like you're on your own, you know? So that's where we come in. And I kind of figured that out within a few years of working where I work right now. Like, okay, there's a break here. Where's that gap? Where can we come in? So, you know, we're not going anywhere. we'll be here. we'll be here. Yeah.
Just to finish it off on the thought, I have two things to say. One, I really appreciate you bringing up the airplane example, that you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of anyone else. It's one of those core tenets that we believe with DemiTool as well, where if you're not sleeping, if you're not eating, how are you supposed to do everything else? And so I appreciate that point. And then also, it just, from this conversation, it's abundantly clear that it takes a village to raise a child is.
Oh yes.
It's so true, because it's not just one problem, and it's not just one type of problem. It's a lot of different steps and a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And to have someone like you just saying, hey, I'm a little removed from all of this, but I can like help you better think about it, or just even provide you a space where now we think about funds. We don't think about anything else. Or
Yeah.
a different space where now we think about work, and even you helping someone with their career directly and like negotiating more for them. It,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's
Oh yeah.
it's a lot of work.
We even had it where we had the place I work at was recently, there's a lawsuit that's out there, and it came from a student that was involved with the disability resources, I'll say, and they were really disappointed in what was going on there. And the beauty of it, and this is in the newspaper, I know it's one of those times of always like you're doing it right. The person was saying how they were having all of these problems. They were illustrating how they were having these problems, and they were articulating them to the T. And then they dropped, the only place we didn't have a problem was blah, 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 which happens to be where I work. Because I know this person. I remember this person. And it's so funny that you brought up food, because this person was visually impaired. And I remember them being at the service desk getting support. They were there often. They had a person with them to kind of help them. But then they would go and get all the support that they needed from us. And you know me, I got food everywhere. So the person would smell the food and I'm like, oh, X, I'm not gonna say their name. You know, like, why don't you taste test this? Why don't you like this? Why don't you try that? You know, you've been here an hour. You know, I know you're hungry. You know, so but it was that kind of approach. Yeah, they felt like they were so welcomed to come in and get the support that they needed, even though, you know, are we all in accessibility realm and all that? Of course not. But we took the time, right, to figure out what's the best way to help someone, or what are some of these resources. And, you know, this is in Braille. We can get it printed here, bring it back, and, you know, we'll work with you. So it goes back to that idea of there isn't a one check all, or you're just looking at, you know, our numbers of recruiting the underserved and what, you know, we're here. No, it's really looking at that person holistically, and putting together wraparound services to make sure that they can be a peak performance. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So even with, again, something like DemiTool and the population I work with, I've said this to you before, and I'm sure past beta phase, you'll consider this, but the one thing folks are interested in, specifically from your generation, and, you know, going down, you know, the next generation to come, is time. Time. It isn't, you know, a brand new car. It isn't diamonds. It isn't a watch. I've heard this from several people, you know, it isn't that. It's time, right? The efficiency of time. And so, and not just having it so you can sit there and look at TikTok. It's like you're bringing up this time so you can do other things, you know. And as we all age, you know, others require more time. So something like this could help with kind of streamlining that process of time. At the end of the day, man, we all only get 24 hours. So if you can streamline it to make it really matter, and effective and efficient, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, and
in my opinion, my humble opinion.
One of the conversations we had internally was, at the end of the day, like, what is it that we really, what is deep down, what is it that we're trying to do? And a while ago, when we did a survey of students, the one like bigger predictor of like success seemed to be the sense of ownership of your time. And under, like, with that sentiment also, time is the most important, the only universal resource. And if we can just help people think about how they see it, think about how they spend it, think about how they plan for it, then things get a little easier, and you start seeing what needs to change. You start seeing, oh, you know, I'm really good at my morning routine, but I'm really terrible at my night routine. For me personally, it's the transition between events. So like if I work out for an hour or two, like it takes me a while to like recover and then go eat and then shower. And so like for me, it's like, okay, now I need something to just say like, all right, Marlon, move. Okay, perfect. Positive changes.
Yeah, a motivator of some sort, or some kind of like accolade, or keep, you know, a stimulus, you know. For me, it's Red Bull. No, I'm kidding. But no, I totally get it. But again, like we all get the same amount. That's the one thing about this resource, right? We all get the exact same amount. And now what you do with it and what you can, which I hate to bring up COVID one more time. If this is not the sweet spot and the time to do this kind of stuff, I don't know what is. But the whole thing of like, you know, paying taxes or going to the DMV and getting your goofy sticker and all. When COVID hit, you know, the government still wants to make their money. So they started, lo and behold, you can do this online now. You know, you just click, pay, and they come, like, you don't have to stand in line and somebody doesn't have to sit here and do this kind of nonsense. And the argument was it always existed, but it took something major to happen to kind of like, speed up the process. Everything's still happening. People are still, there's nothing like being missed in this process other than you're saving time. So that's what it's all about in my mind. And there's so many things that everybody wants to do, but you got to have the time to do it.
Absolutely. And with DemiTool, we can help you balance it out a little bit better. And also with that, I want to respect your time. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. This is awesome.
The goal of the DemiTool podcast is to facilitate positive and constructive conversations around the topics of nutrition, home life, family commitment, career development, sleep quality, mental and physical health, friendships, communities, and of course, the enjoyment of our lives. It's our mission at DemiTool to help you see, adjust, and maintain your life's balance by helping you actively engage with your needs, your goals, your tasks, and your people. If you enjoyed this conversation, and if you see value in what we're building, join our community. You can do so by supporting on Patreon, following on LinkedIn, following on Twitter, and of course, by liking and sharing this video with anyone else who could benefit from these conversations. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you on the next one.